Alrighty, welcome to a crash course to Blue-White Goblin Charbelcher. So to go over what we're going over in the video, we're going to be talking about just general information about the deck for anyone who might be interested but not really know what's going on with it, as it's a combo deck and most combo decks are pretty unique in the way they play. And we'll be going over combo lines because some of these might not be completely intuitive, and just having someone explain them to you is a very helpful thing. And we'll be going over playing around counterplay to your combo. There are multiple cards in this list that are very well suited against counterplay, and I will be talking about those with you. All right, so just the gist of the deck. So what makes the deck work is just Lotus Bloom, Goblin Charbelcher. Tameshi gave it a lot of reliability and gave it a graveyard play mechanic, and that is very nice. It also has eight, I mean, I like to call them diggers, but I don't really know what the correct word for it is in Thundertrap Trainer and Pelagi Archaeologist, of either looking at the top cards in your library and picking one that you want, or milling and then picking one that you want. They are extremely nice for finding combo pieces. Well, every combo piece besides Tameshi. Tameshi, you have to draw naturally from drawing a card. There is no way in the deck to find her just by either searching through Thundertrap, or nothing can tutor Tameshi to hand, nothing. See, but if you draw one, it is a very strong card. So yeah, so you would just suspend Lotus Bloom, and on turn 4, you have 4 mana, you cast Goblin Charbelcher, you crack Lotus Bloom for 3, and tap Goblin Charbelcher, and you win the game. That's the main combo. It may not seem like too much of a combo, but just the deck building restrictions make it make it have to be a combo, as you're only allowed to run modal lands unless you sideboard it in a basic for non-basic land hate. It works very well with those 8 diggers that I mentioned earlier, with Flare of Denial and other free counter spells, allowing you to do what you need to push your combo forward and still hold up interaction. Alrighty, so we'll be going over a couple lines here. There is the classic, which I mentioned whenever I did the gist. The classic featuring Whir of Invention, the classic with Tameshi, Whir and Tameshi combined. And then we'll be going over some Tameshi counterplay for counter spells. And then my least favorite of sticking it and praying. So here we go in the classic. It is just very simple. You just suspend your Lotus Bloom on turn 1, play 3 lands on, you get to have a Bolt land on turn 4, or else you will not have enough mana to play and activate Goblin Charbelcher. That is one thing. You need Bloom in your opening hand. You can find Goblin Charbelcher in like the top 15 cards if you have 2 diggers. Very heavy counterplay unless you are once again playing around Flare or Shoal. All in all, like this will be your standard thing, but it's just all about how you protect it with counter spells, because it does give a lot of ways to counterplay. You have to watch out very hard for decks that will just kill you on turn 3 if you do not have any creatures as blockers. Bolt land must happen on turn 4, and best if precast or protected by precast flare, or a disrupting shoal as well. But the disrupting shoal, you have to have it line up with the counterplay that they have for you, whether it be a counter spell for 2 mana, uh, force for 3 mana. Like you just have to have the lineup, which makes it a little bit harder. Alrighty, so now we have the classic featuring Whir of Invention. Mostly the same weaknesses. Um, you have to, instead of suspending a card from your hand on turn 1, you have to spend 3 mana on the opponent's end step to whir out a Lotus Bloom. Holding up the 3 mana on turn 3 is it hurts a little bit, and sometimes you won't be able to go off this turn, strictly because you have to interact with them or else you will lose the game. Which I mean, you just choose interacting and wait one more turn and try to go off again. You just keep pushing that one turn back every time you have to interact instead of going off. But if they do something that won't immediately kill you, you just let that through and win on your turn. Yeah, if you have Whir instead of Bloom, it's pretty solid. But you do have to have 2 Bolt lands for this approach. You have to have a turn 3 Bolt land and a turn 4 Bolt lands. Turn 3 so you can cast Whir, and turn 4 for Charbelcher. And then with the 3 mana for Bloom to activation. Bloom cannot be countered or consigned this way. They get counter the Whir, but for consigned to memory, it can't touch it once its Whir is a blue spell, which is a very nice thing, especially just with Whir of Intervention as in general. Just being able to get around consign, which is one of many decks' highest forms of counterplay to us. A consign replicated 3 times is extremely hard to play around. So here we'll be going through the Tameshi loop because the next combos are going to have the Tameshi loop in them. So we're first going to watch a quick example here.
Force.
This is one of my other YouTube
Right,
videos
so
where I'm
tap
starting
that
with the
for blue
Tameshi loop
while
here.
we're at it. Pay 1 white. Done. Bring Super Springs back. Draw the card. And now what? He tries to
The
take
opponent
command
does
for
think
3 to
a
exile
little bit
Tameshi.
about what he wants to do here, but here,
Then let's go.
my old self. But yeah, cracking the bloom, using 1 white to start the loop, targeting bloom, returning a tapped land to hand. Always remember to tap your lands before you start the loop. And then you bring it back, you draw your first card. I guess you should say that you will draw your card, then you will bring it back. But in most cases, that's not going to matter unless they try to respond because you brought it back first, which then it is just an incorrect game state, as you should have that card in your hand. So always remember the first land you return to your hand with Tameshi, you need to draw a card. Yeah. If you're just casting Belcher, it doesn't matter if you tap it for white or blue unless you need to hold up interaction. So I always like to tap for blue in the last 2, no matter how many times I tap for white first, just so I know I have blue up, so I can either play around a Jawara Disruption or honestly just anything, a sink into stupor. Here in this loop, I actually use Whir, and just Whir for 4 is a nice way to get Goblin Charbelcher unconsignable. Alrighty. So there's a quick explanation of what happened there. So with Tameshi and Lotus Bloom on the field, you tap all of your mana and float it into your pool. So you'll sack the Lotus for 3 white to start the loop. Target Lotus with Tameshi, paying a white and returning a land to your hand for the costs. And then you will draw a card for the first loop. And if it's not the first loop, you just go straight to returning Lotus to field. And now that Lotus is back on the field, that has completed the single loop of, just looping Lotus. Um, you will repeat this as many times as you need to get the mana that you need. Then, so the math for how much mana Tameshi produces that you should figure out in your head before your turn, before you decide to try to go off. It is 2 mana per tapped land and 3 per untapped. and then you add 3 if Lotus starts in the battlefield, as you can still loop Lotus out of the graveyard to start, which is very nice if they counter Lotus or destroy it with a Beseiju. I've had it marched before. March is a lot less nice because it does exile. I am 90% sure it exiles. But if you ever get it targeted with the march, always second response. Honestly, for most things, if it's not destroying it, just second response. Heck, even if it is destroying it, sacking it response honestly doesn't hurt unless you did side in a mountain and they tried to besage you it, but you didn't pull out your mountain yet. Then you'll probably want to leave it there so that you will still pull out the mountain, just in case it is in the top 10 cards of your library. So you add up all the tapped, untapped lands after you cast Tameshi and casting Whir for 0 if you did it on if you did either of them on the current turn. You only count up your mana after you considered casting Tameshi and Whir for 0 if you need the Lotus to start the loop. Always land drop if you did not after you return your land to hand with Tameshi, as it does just let you land drop. If you just didn't, or if you weren't able to play your land per turn, maybe you only had 3 lands untapped, played Tameshi, cracked the bloom, and started the loop. Well, you still have your 4th land drop, and if it's a bolt land, you still have 3 extra mana you can add to the loop just for 3 life. And that much mana is enough to hold up any interaction you want in the deck. Alrighty, so the classic with Tameshi, this is going to be using our combo that we talked about. You only need 3 lands for this, and you don't even need a single bolt land. So it makes this very nice for whenever you are struggling a little on lands. Maybe maybe you need to play a Bolt Land turn 2 to dig deep with a Thunder Trap trainer, and you just could only find a tap land, and then you've dug out there. And you couldn't find other land to play on turn 4. Maybe you found a flare because you needed a flare denial to protect this combo because you had every piece in like ready to go, but you just didn't need the 4th land. Um, Yeah, most control decks will opt to counter Belcher instead of Bloom. Uh, most most decks see like if they just stop you from playing Belcher, then that's it. But this can come back to hurt them a little bit if you get 4 or 5. I should say 5 or 6 or 7 lands later in the game with Tameshi and the loop and Belcher. Because if you were able to float a lot of mana and loop 6 or 7 lands, maybe that start the turn untapped, you could loop, play Belcher, they counter Belcher, and then you just loop Belcher back out of the graveyard. Yeah, produces lots of mana based on the math we talked about. And then with Tameshi turn 3 or turn 4, that is a little bit of a question. I don't like leaving Tameshi out there for a full turn, even if it's just sitting there, because you never know what decks are actually going to hold up their mana or use, for instance, for energy. Maybe if it's their turn 3, they play a Flage. Whereas if you played Tameshi, they would be hitting you with a Galvanic Discharge to kill Tameshi. So I don't like leaving Tameshi out there, and whenever possible, I only play her the second I am ready to combo. And yeah, once again, remember to land drop during loop, and remember to draw a card on the first land you return to your hand before Lotus Bloom enters the battlefield. So here we got Word Tameshi. It was talked about a little bit before. So you can combo with no board in one turn with 4 lands. So you do need your turn 4 bolt land. So you will Word for 0, grab Lotus, 3 white on Lotus. Lotus goes to the graveyard. Tap 1 blue and play Tameshi, using 2 of the white from Lotus and the 1 blue for the blue pip. With 1 white left, you now have the white for Tameshi activation to start the combo. And if you did all of this, so you all now have 4 tapped lands, the 1 mana open and Lotus in the graveyard. So that produces 9 mana. That is enough for Goblin Charbelcher, activate, and 2 left over just in case you're holding up a Spell Snare, you're holding up a Jawari Disruption, because then maybe they tapped out all but 1 mana because they had a consign in hand. It's very good as well whenever you're going for that whir line earlier, where you were on instep, but you actually had to interact on their turn. And now you don't have enough mana to whir. But now, on your turn, you just whir instead and win with Tameshi. It is very good. And it honestly just comes out of nowhere for most decks. If they did not keep mana open for this turn, they lose the game. Here's my least favorite. Stick it and pray. This is when you hard cast Goblin Charbelcher with no Lotus Bloom, no Tameshi. You just stick it on the field, look at your opponent, and say pass. You will need to pray to whatever god you believe in that they do not have interaction, because if they do, and this is your play, you are screwed. Because they will untap, have access to every card in their hand now that their mana is untapped, and you just hope. Some opponents won't have interactions if it was a grindy game. Um, like if both of you are down to 1 or 2 cards in hand and you top deck a Belcher, honestly, I slam it. Unless I'm at 6 lands, then I want to play for 7. But if I'm at 5 lands with no counter spells in hand, I will absolutely slam Belcher every time. Yeah, would rather play for 7 lands, and because there's no room for a Boseiju if you play Belcher and immediately activate it. That is the biggest thing, especially into decks like Titan and Brute that run 3 Boseijus, it feels like, 4 of them. If you just cast it and go, they never gain priority until the ability's on the stack. It is a very nice thing to be able to play it and activate it immediately afterwards. So it's Tameshi Counterspell Counterplay. In my last RCQ, I actually had this come up and it won me the game, and he had a consigned memory in hand. So I had Tameshi and I was looping. Well, I looped once, I guess I should say. The turn before, played Belcher, he countered it. I had another Belcher in hand that I could have thrown out, but I thought to myself, he probably has a counter spell. So I pass, go to my next turn, loop some Tameshi some more, and then I just loop Belcher out of the graveyard. That's not a counterable thing, it's an activated ability. And unless they have a stifle effect, guess what? You now have Belcher on the field. You now get to activate Belcher, and they could not interact with you. It is very nice, especially in the Thoughtseize, because they will often opt to rip Belcher out of your hand. However, I will say that they would. I've had Whir ripped out of my hand more than Belcher, but Whir also really helps the combo. Tameshi as well really helps the combo. But for some decks, playing a turn 4 Belcher, activating at turn 5, that's nothing. They can just kill you by turn 4. So they will take your combo pieces instead. But if they happen to take Belcher, it is honestly not terrible if you have Tameshi. Oh yeah, the warning that I put here in all caps, because I forget it sometimes. Do not loop every single land to your hand until you're ready to loop Belcher. I have gotten into the groove before and just considered Lotus looping every single land to my hand. I had a bunch of mana, couldn't play a land, couldn't grab Belcher out of the graveyard with Tameshi. So I highly advise you to, if you are going to be grabbing Belcher out of the graveyard or leaving the option open, leave 1 land on the battlefield. All right, so yeah, we got some digging for the answers in combo. My general thing is I just dig for what I don't have. If if I have like 2 of these dudes and 2 Flare Denials, I'm gonna be digging for Word of Invention. I'm gonna be digging for Goblin Charbelcher. On turn 2, I would even consider digging for a Lotus Bloom, but I wouldn't really want to dig for Lotus Bloom outside of turn 2. Uh, let's see. Yeah, if you have any answers you want, you dig for the combo. to quickly finish the game before you run out of answers. That is very important to quickly finish the game. As we are a combo deck, we do not have a very strong late game, or we do not scale up very well. We peak at turn 4, sometimes turn 5, and that's it. Like, we will get outpaced by decks who stick more permanents to the battlefield that have an ever-growing board, and we will really need to hurry up and just win the game on the spot. Disrupting Shoal is something you can play around with these guys. Something I like to do, I believe it was into a Prowess deck. I Thundertrap trainered and took a Bayene Veil, which is a 2 CMC blue spell, for Disrupting Shoal, which lets you exile a blue spell from your hand, and if it has a matching CMC, you counter the spell that you target. It was very nice to be able to play that and then still hold up a 2 CMC counter spell for something like a Frog or a Slick Shot into the Prowess. 2 lands with 2 diggers, very common for me. Like if I see a Thunder Trap and a Phalagi or 2 Thunder Traps or something and 2 lands, I'm keeping that hand. I will be able to find what I need in the top 10 cards of my library. So let's go over the counter spells, because that is one major thing that Belcher has over any other combo deck. Just the ability to have so many counter spells in the deck. So flaring your Thunder Trap and Phalagi and even Tameshi if you finished your loop and it's it. Like you need that Belcher to resolve and you will win the game. Absolutely flare Tameshi. However, if you have extra mana, I would probably advise hard casting the flare if you have enough to not need more. Because even if Tameshi stays around and they end up having another counterspell that you don't have an answer to, you are able to produce a lot more mana going and just sticking with Tameshi and leaving him on the field. I would only flare Tameshi as a last ditch effort to win the game on the spot, or else you will lose. Shoal lineups. That's something you'll have to learn as you go, of whether or not you actually counter the spell if you have a lineup, because maybe you need your third land drop, but the Frog Tide deck is playing Psychic Frog. Do you counter well, obviously you counter the frog, but getting rid of your third land drop if you don't have another one is also a very rough decision. Most decisions like that, though, this are out of the scope of this video. So all those decisions you will have to learn as you play. Stern Scolding, only Stern Scolding, influential targets. Like in Boros, there's no reason to Stern Scolding a Guide of Souls. Stick it to, I guess, Ragavan, Ocelot, Pride, and Ajani. Um, Even the Pyromancer, like it's not it. It does not do enough for their game plan that you need it gone off this field as quickly as possible. Spell Snare. So since Spell Snare is a bit more constrictive, you want to Spell Snare most targets that advance their game plan quite a bit. So you'll definitely want to hit the Ajani, the Goblin Bombardment, Slick Shot Show Off, Frogs. You can use it to protect your Belcher in a Frog matchup just to be able to counterspell their counterspell. Um, Philia and Blink is also another good target. White Orchid Phantom, which that's atrocious to play against for us, but it just 1 mana answer to it, nice and clean. But yeah, there won't be any more talk about Stern Scolding and Spell Snare, but I will go over Flare and Show a little bit more here. So yeah, Phalagi and Thundertrap are bodies after they enter the battlefield. You can basically see them as flare fodder. Unless they're needed in blockers and to search in matchups like Zoo, Boros, and Prowess, they're 99% of the time flare fodder. Flaring off Tameshi is last case scenario. Like if you need it done, maybe you're looking down a 7/7 Murktide at 5 HP and you're trying to stick a Belcher, you'll want to flare the Tameshi to keep that Belcher and resolving. But if you're looking at an empty board and I mean, it gets a little rough there because you don't want to end up giving them 5 time walks in a row just because you have to start over, your land drops all over again. Like that's a really rough time, and you do not want to be put in that position. Whereas with Tameshi, you could start land dropping and in 2 turns loop up for like 6 mana. Board out your flares. They are not all knowing, all powerful. If you need your chumps as blockers, you board out flares for different things. Uh, Lots of decks just run creature removal strictly because they want to be able to push through their own damage through blockers. Those decks also, you very much need to board out your flares because they're just going to throw creature removal at your creatures anyway. Like their creatures are just going to end up dead before you even want to cast flare. And then now all of a sudden you just have a 3 mana counter spell, and that's not good enough. Disrupting Shoal. So there's lots of Shoal considerations. Grabbing cards with your diggers. Think about the CMC of the spells. I have before grabbed a Seagate Restoration off of one of the diggers to be able to shoal a 7 CMC spell from Eldrazi before. Just different things like that. Maybe you grab a spell snare so you can shoal a 1 drop from energy, or grabbing a 2 drop to shoal a frog or a counterspell. Just different things like that. Just realize how your mana costs line up with your opponent's deck. Also, would it be worse to lose the card you're pitching or let the card you're countering resolve? That is another really big thing. Just because you have the lineup doesn't mean you should take the lineup. One thing is Flood Maw. Like if they're just trying to resolve a 1 CMC spell that doesn't look nice, but they're also a deck that could be running Clarion Conqueror, they could be running Pithing Needle. Do you actually do it, or do you hold the Flood Maw for when you try to win the game? So you can Flood Maw a Pithing Needle or a Clarion Conqueror should they get it out. And in longer games, remember, Shoal can be hardcast. That I know it is basically there because of the free cast, but hardcasting it is an option, and I have done it multiple times, and it is very useful for when it is. Alrighty, so some hate answers. A lot of the hate for our deck is turning off activated abilities. Sink into Stupor and Into the Floodmaw are our 2 main answers. Let's see, what was it? Oh, yeah, Tameshi is there for Sink into Stupor. You can play it as a land, loop it up to your hand with Tameshi, and then use Sink to send a Pithing Needle back to their hand. It is a very nice line, and I have won multiple games off of it. Their Pithing Needle naming Goblin Charbelcher. I loop up, I have 10 mana, I sink their Pithing Needle, 7 mana left, pay 4, cast Belcher, pay 3, tap, and win the game. Or same thing with Stony Silence. Same thing with Disruptor Flute. Deafening Silence, however, is one you have to be a little tricky with because you need to either sink or flood maw it first. It has to be the first spell you cast, has to be sending it back. Something I have done with Deafening Silence before is they play it and my Lotus Bloom comes off suspend. Well, in response to it coming off suspend, I will flood maw the Deafening Silence so that I get my Lotus and I can still play the game that turn. Clarion Conqueror is much more difficult than with the other ones, simply because it also turns off Tameshi, turning off and Lotus Bloom as well. So it just turns off every single activated ability that our deck can have, and it's a really rough time to have. Stony Silence does turn off Bloom and Belcher, but turning off Tameshi makes it very rough. But yeah, that is pretty much the crash course on how to play the deck. I didn't go very in-depth into any decision trees because, as I said before, it's a bit out of the scope. This is wants to prepare you to play the deck itself so that you're not going in blind. If this video gets traction, I will absolutely look into building more matchup specific videos, maybe go into some of those decision trees that I talked about before on do I do this and when do you make this decision and what scenario and what scenarios is it good and what scenarios is it okay. We're just kind of talking about I guess, the different ways you should be thinking. And yeah, alrighty. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.